My name is Charlotte, and I am 34 years old. I have spent 12 years of my life building something I believed in at Tech Vision Solutions. That Friday morning, when my boss called me into his office with that smirk on his face, I knew exactly what was coming. He leaned back in his leather chair and said the words I had been expecting for months. "You will be training your replacement. After 12 years, we are letting you go." I nodded calmly and said, "Of course." What he did not know, what he could not have possibly imagined, was that 3 months earlier, I had done something extraordinary, something that would change everything. Before I tell you what happened next, I would love to know. Have you ever been underestimated at work? Have you ever felt invisible despite giving everything you had? Drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. And if you want to see how this story unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will not want to miss what happens when he finds out the truth. 12 years ago, I was 22 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in business administration and a head full of dreams. I walked into Tech Vision Solutions for my interview wearing a suit I had borrowed from my roommate because I could not afford one of my own. The company was tiny back then, just 15 employees crammed into the second floor of an old building in downtown Seattle. The space smelled like burnt coffee from the ancient machine in the corner, but sunlight poured through the tall windows, and something about it felt right. It felt like possibility. Walter Morrison was the founder, a kind man in his early 60s with silver hair and laugh lines around his eyes that told you he had lived a good life. He sat across from me in that interview, not behind some imposing desk, but in a worn chair that matched mine. He asked me about my goals, my values, what kind of company I wanted to help build. I remember thinking this was different. This was not just about what I could do for them. It was about what we could create together. When he offered me the position of junior account manager 2 days later, I cried in my car before driving home. This was my chance, my shot at building something real. That first year flew by in a blur of late nights and early mornings. I lived off ramen and determination, pouring everything I had into learning the business. Walter was patient with me, teaching me not just about client management, but about treating people with dignity. He brought donuts every Monday morning, knew everyone's birthday, asked about our families. The office felt less like a workplace and more like a community. I loved it there. I loved the work, the people, the sense that we were all in it together. By my second year, something clicked. I landed my first major contract with a large insurance company worth $250,000. I will never forget the moment I closed that deal. I was sitting in a conference room with their VP of Operations, a stern woman named Mrs. Patricia Holden, and I somehow convinced her that our small company could handle their needs better than the giants she had been considering. When she signed the contract, my hands shook. Walter took the whole team out to celebrate that night. He raised his glass and said, "Charlotte is proof that talent and heart will always win." I felt 10 feet tall. The years that followed were the best of my professional life. By my fourth year, I was promoted to account manager. My team's revenue grew by 35% that year. By year 7, I became senior account manager, managing relationships with over 50 clients. I gave up vacations, worked weekends, stayed late to ensure every project exceeded expectations. It was not a sacrifice to me. This company was my baby too. I had helped it grow from 15 people to 120 employees. Revenue had exploded from $3 million annually to $50 million. I knew every client by name, understood their businesses, their challenges, their goals. These relationships were not just transactions, they were built on trust that took years to develop. Walter was more than a boss to me. He was a mentor, almost a father figure. He would pull me aside after big wins and tell me how proud he was. He once said, "If I could have given this company to someone who truly cares, it would be you, Charlotte." Those words meant everything to me. This place was my home. These people were my family. I could not imagine being anywhere else. But 4 years ago, everything changed. Walter decided it was time to retire. He was 75 years old and wanted to spend time with his grandchildren, travel with his wife, finally slow down. I understood, even though it broke my heart a little. The board of directors hired Gregory Hartman as the new CEO. I will never forget the day he walked in. Early 40s hair slicked back with so much gel, it looked wet, expensive navy blue suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and cologne so strong you could smell him coming from down the hall. He was nothing like Walter. Gregory's management style was all business. Cold, calculated, numbers-driven. He did not ask how your weekend was or remember your kids' names. Meetings with him were short, clinical, focused purely on metrics and margins. There were no more Monday donuts, no birthday celebrations, no casual conversations by the coffee machine. The warmth drained out of the office like someone had opened a window in winter. But I tried to adapt. I told myself this was just a different leadership style. New direction, new approach. It happens. Companies evolve. I could work with this. At first, Gregory seemed to appreciate what I brought to the table. In one executive meeting, he publicly called me the backbone of our client relations. He said my portfolio of accounts was the most valuable asset the company had. I felt validated, seen. Maybe this would work out after all. Maybe I had been worried for nothing. I threw myself into my work even harder, determined to prove that I could thrive under any leadership. I believed that if I just kept my head down and delivered results, everything would be fine. I was wrong. About 2 years ago, I started noticing small changes. Subtle shifts that individually seemed insignificant, but together painted a troubling picture. Gregory stopped emailing me directly about important matters. Instead, I would find myself copied on group emails, just another name on a long list. In meetings, I noticed he would ask for input from Trevor, our VP of Sales, or Justin, our marketing director, but somehow skip over me. Even when the topic was directly related to client relationships, my area of expertise. I remember one quarterly meeting where I presented a new strategy for client retention. I had spent weeks developing it, analyzing data, interviewing clients. Gregory listened, nodded occasionally, but made no comment. Not good, not bad, nothing. 2 weeks later, Trevor presented almost the exact same strategy, just worded slightly differently. Gregory called it a brilliant idea and asked Trevor to implement it immediately. I sat there feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. Had I presented it that poorly? Had I somehow failed to communicate the value? I spent that night questioning my abilities, wondering what I was doing wrong. Then came the promotion that should have been mine. 18 months ago, the Director of Client Relations position opened up. I was the obvious choice. I had been with the company longer than anyone else in the department. My client retention rate was 92%, the highest in company history. The accounts I managed generated over $30 million in annual revenue. I knew every system, every process, every relationship inside and out. I prepared for weeks creating a comprehensive presentation about my vision for the department. I bought a new suit, charcoal gray and professional, and put together a portfolio documenting every success I had achieved. The interview went well, or so I thought. Gregory and 3 board members asked questions, and I answered confidently. They nodded, took notes, seemed engaged. I walked out feeling hopeful. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was my moment to finally step into the leadership role I had earned. 2 weeks later, Gregory sent a company-wide email announcing that Kyle Bennett would be our new Director of Client Relations. Kyle Bennett, a man who had been with the company for 8 months. 8 months compared to my 10 years at that point. He had come from a competitor, and yes, he had sales experience, but he had no relationships with our current clients. He did not understand our culture or our approach to relationship management. His background was in aggressive sales tactics, not the careful, trust-based approach we had always used. I sat at my desk staring at that email for probably 20 minutes. The office buzzed around me, people congratulating Kyle, but I felt frozen. Finally, I gathered the courage to email Gregory asking for feedback on my interview. What could I improve? What had I been lacking? His response came 3 hours later, brief and crushing. We felt Kyle brought fresh perspective and new energy the department needs. That was it. No specifics, no constructive criticism, no acknowledgement of my 10 years of dedicated service. Just a corporate brush-off that made it clear my contributions were not valued the way I had believed they were. Kyle became my direct supervisor, and life at work transformed into something I barely recognized. Suddenly, I had to submit daily reports about every client interaction, every email, every phone call. I had never been micromanaged before, but Kyle wanted to know everything. He started attending my client meetings, and I noticed a pattern. He would let me do most of the talking, then afterwards he would send follow-up emails to the clients positioning himself as the strategic lead. My ideas became his ideas in documentation. My strategies became his initiatives in reports to upper management. One afternoon, Mrs. Patricia Holden, the client from that first big contract I had landed 8 years earlier, called me on my cell phone instead of through the office line. "Charlotte, dear, is everything all right? That young man Kyle, he seems to be taking credit for the work you and I have developed together over the years." I assured her everything was fine, that it was just new management structure, but inside I was screaming. Even my clients could see what was happening. They noticed, they cared, but apparently the people who ran this company did not. My coworker Linda, a woman who had been with Tech Vision for 9 years, noticed too. She was 48 years old, sharp as a tack, and did not suffer fools. One morning by the coffee machine, she leaned in close and whispered, "This place is not what it used to be, Charlotte. I think they are trying to push out people who remember how good it was before." Linda was right, but I was not ready to hear it yet. I had invested too much. This was my life's work. I could not just walk away. The isolation grew worse over the following months. I was removed from email chains about strategic decisions. Calendar invites to important meetings would arrive, then get canceled at the last minute with vague explanations about limited space. Meanwhile, people who had been hired 6 months ago were included in sessions I was excluded from. Kyle started assigning me tasks that belonged to junior associates: data entry, scheduling his meetings, proofreading documents that I used to write myself. I was being systematically stripped of responsibility and dignity, one small cut at a time. One day I realized I was no longer copied on emails regarding the Jameson account, a client I had personally managed for 9 years. When I asked Kyle about it, he barely looked up from his computer. "We are transitioning to a new team structure. Do not worry, you will still have plenty to do." Plenty to do. Administrative tasks for accounts I had built from the ground up. Relationships I had nurtured through late-night calls and weekend emergencies, and years of earning trust. All of it was being handed to people who did not know these clients, did not understand their businesses, did not care about them as people. Linda left the company 3 months before everything came to a head. On her last day, she asked me to meet her at a coffee shop down the street. We sat in a corner booth, and she looked at me with such sadness. "Charlotte, you need to leave. They are pushing you out. I have seen this before. They want you to quit so they do not have to pay severance. They are making your life miserable on purpose." I shook my head. "But I built so much here, Linda. I cannot just walk away." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Sometimes walking away is the strongest thing you can do. Know your worth and do not let them take it from you." I thought about her words that night and many nights after, but I still was not ready. I kept hoping things would improve, that somehow Gregory would see my value again, that this was just a rough patch. I stayed late one evening, the office empty and silent, except for the hum of computers. I walked past the awards hanging on the walls, plaques with my name on them for top performer, for client retention, for revenue growth. I stood there alone under the fluorescent lights, wondering when I had become a ghost in my own home. 3 months ago, on a Wednesday evening, I went back to the office around 8 p.m. to grab my laptop that I had forgotten. I was exhausted from a long day, frustrated from another meeting where Kyle had taken credit for my proposal, and I just wanted to get my computer and go home. The parking lot was nearly empty. The building was dark except for a few scattered lights. I took the elevator up, walked down the quiet hallway, and that was when I heard voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly open, light spilling out into the darkened hall. I recognized those voices immediately. Gregory and Kyle. I should have kept walking. I should have grabbed my laptop and left, but when I heard my name, I froze. Every instinct told me to leave, but my feet would not move. Gregory was speaking. "So the replacement candidate you found, she starts," when Kyle responded. "Emily Rodriguez. She can start in 3 months. Fresh MBA from Stanford, eager, and significantly less expensive than what we are paying Charlotte." My heart stopped. Replacement. They were discussing my replacement. Gregory laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Perfect. Have Charlotte train her for a month, then we will let Charlotte go. Save us, what, $120,000 annually with salary difference?" Kyle sounded pleased with himself. "Plus bonus structure. Charlotte's contracts have old commission rates that Walter set up. Emily will be on our new scale, much lower percentages." They kept talking, their voices casual, like they were discussing where to order lunch, rather than dismantling someone's career. Gregory said, "Make sure Charlotte does not suspect anything. We need her to transfer all client relationships smoothly first. Those accounts are too valuable to risk." Kyle assured him it was handled. Already working on documentation, I have been having Charlotte write detailed process guides for training purposes. She has no idea. They both laughed. The sound echoed in that empty hallway and carved itself into my memory. Gregory said 12 years, and she never saw it coming. That is what happens when people get too comfortable. I backed away slowly, carefully, terrified they would hear me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my bag. I walked to my office in a daze, grabbed my laptop, and somehow made it to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for probably 30 minutes, unable to turn the key, unable to process what I had just heard. 12 years. I had given them 12 years of my life. Late nights, sacrificed weekends, missed family events, relationships neglected, all for this company. I had made them millions of dollars. I had built their client base from nothing into one of the most solid portfolios in the industry. And they were going to fire me to save money. They were going to use me to train my own replacement, extract every last bit of value from my knowledge and relationships, and then toss me aside like I was nothing. Like those 12 years meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I drove home that night, barely seeing the road through my tears. I did not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling betrayed in a way I had never experienced. It was not just about losing my job. It was about the systematic way they had devalued me, stolen my work, isolated me, all while planning this final humiliation. Part of me wanted to quit immediately, to walk in the next morning and tell them exactly what I thought. But another part, a quieter but stronger part, started to think differently. They thought I was comfortable, complacent, blind. Maybe it was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. The next morning I called in sick. I could not face that office yet. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold while I worked. I started researching. Tech Vision Solutions was a privately held company, not publicly traded. 5 years ago, when Gregory was hired, Walter had sold a controlling stake to a private equity firm called Grandview Capital Partners. Walter had kept 30% of the company as part of his retirement agreement. Grandview owned the other 70%. I knew this because I had been there during the transition. What I did not know was whether anything had changed since then. I dug deeper. Public records, corporate filings, financial data. The company was healthy, profitable, growing. Our EBITDA was strong. Market valuation estimates put us somewhere around $80 million. I started doing math. Walter owned 30%. That would be worth approximately $24 million at current valuation. An absurd amount of money, completely out of reach for someone like me. Or was it? I remembered something Walter had said to me 5 years ago during the transition to Gregory's leadership. We were having coffee in his office, one of our last conversations before he stepped back. He had looked sad that day. Charlotte, if I could have, I would have left this company to people like you who actually care. Gregory and his board, they see spreadsheets. You see people. Never forget that matters more. I had thanked him, thinking it was just a kind sentiment from a man facing retirement, but now those words took on new meaning. I picked up my phone. My hands were steadier than they had been the night before. I scrolled through my contacts and found Walter's number. We had kept in touch over the years. He would call every few months to check in, see how things were going, chat about the company he still loved, even though he no longer ran it. I took a deep breath and called. He answered on the third ring. "Charlotte, what a wonderful surprise. How are you, dear?" We exchanged pleasantries for a minute, but I could not maintain small talk. "Walter, I need to ask you something. Your 30% stake in Tech Vision. Have you ever thought about selling it?" There was a long pause. "Actually, I have. Gregory has been pressuring me to sell to Grandview so they can have full control. But I have been hesitant. The thought of them owning everything makes me uncomfortable." "Why do you ask?" My next words came out stronger than I felt. "Would you consider selling it to me instead?" The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. "Charlotte, that would be... Are you serious?" "Completely serious, Walter. I have savings and I can get financing. I want to try." Another pause, then his voice came back different. Warm, excited. "Come to my house. Tomorrow. Let us talk about this properly." We set a time, and after we hung up, I sat there feeling something I had not felt in months. Hope. Not the passive waiting kind of hope. Active, fierce, determined hope. They wanted to push me out. Instead, I was going to buy my way in. I was going to take back what I had helped build, and they were never going to see it coming. 2 days later, I drove to Bellevue to meet Walter at his home. It was a beautiful house, overlooking Lake Washington, full of windows and light, the kind of place someone retires to after a life well lived. Walter greeted me at the door with a hug and led me to his study. We sat in comfortable chairs by a fireplace, and he got straight to the point. "Charlotte, before we talk numbers, I need to know why you want this." Why now? I told him everything. The systematic marginalization, Kyle stealing my work, the promotion I deserved going to someone less qualified, the overheard conversation about my planned termination. Walter's expression grew darker as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I am so sorry. I handed my legacy to people who do not understand what makes a company great. I should have fought harder to ensure leadership passed to someone who cared about more than profit margins. You deserved better." We talked for 3 hours that afternoon. Walter explained the financial details. He was willing to sell his 30% stake for $24 million fair market value. He was not trying to profit off me. That was just what it was worth. The number was staggering. I walked him through my financial situation. I had savings of $250,000 accumulated carefully over 12 years. My retirement accounts held another $130,000. I owned a small condo with about $320,000 in equity. Total, I could potentially access around $700,000. I needed to finance $23,300,000. It seemed impossible, but Walter had connections. He introduced me to his personal banker, Nathan Silverstein, at Pacific Northwest Bank. I met with Nathan 2 days later. He was a serious man in his 60s who had worked in commercial lending for decades. I presented my case. I knew TechVision inside and out. I could document every revenue stream, every client relationship, every operational process. I had 12 years of performance records showing my direct contribution to company growth. Nathan listened carefully, asked detailed questions, and took notes. Over the next 2 weeks, my life became a blur of two realities. During the day, I went to work as usual, smiled at Kyle even though I wanted to scream, completed the administrative tasks he assigned me, wrote the process documentation he requested, knowing it was meant to train my replacement. Nobody suspected anything. I was the same Charlotte. I had always been quiet and professional and compliant, but my nights and weekends belonged to something else entirely. I met with Nathan with lawyers, with accountants. I drafted business plans. I created financial projections based on my intimate knowledge of the company's operations. I outlined my strategy for leadership if the acquisition succeeded. Nathan was impressed. Charlotte, your knowledge of this company's operations is extraordinary. You essentially know every revenue stream, every cost center, every strategic relationship. Most acquisition candidates do not have this level of inside information. That gives us leverage. The bank approved a complex financing package. It combined a small business administration loan with a traditional commercial loan. I put up everything I owned as collateral: my condo, my retirement accounts, personal guarantees that would leave me in debt for years if this failed. And Walter? Generous. Walter agreed to hold a seller's note for $5 million at favorable interest rates. I believe in you, he said. I believe you will make this company what it was always meant to be. 2.5 weeks after that first phone call, I sat in a lawyer's office, signing documents that transferred 30% ownership of TechVision Solutions to me. My hand shook as I signed my name over and over. Each signature felt like jumping off a cliff, but I did not hesitate. This was it. No turning back now. But owning 30% was not enough. Gregory and Grandview still controlled 70%. I needed more. I spent the next 2 weeks researching Grandview Capital Partners. They were a mid-sized private equity firm that had invested in TechVision 5 years ago, but portfolios evolve and I discovered something interesting. Grandview had shifted their investment strategy. They were focusing on larger companies now, enterprises worth hundreds of millions. TechVision at $80 million was too small for their current model. They wanted out. They had been waiting for the right buyer. I called the managing partner, a man named Robert Brennan. I expected to leave a voicemail. Instead, he answered, "Mr. Brennan, my name is Charlotte Hayes. I currently own 30% of TechVision Solutions, and I am interested in discussing the purchase of your remaining 70% stake." Another moment of silence. Then he said, "I am listening." We talked for an hour. I presented my vision for the company, my history with it, my relationships with every major client, my understanding of operations, my plans for growth. Robert was intrigued. He said they had been looking for an exit. Gregory had expressed interest in buying them out, but his financing was weak and they had concerns about his leadership style, which had caused some employee turnover. The number was intimidating: $56 million for 70% of the company. Combined with what I had paid Walter, I was looking at $80 million total to own TechVision completely. It was insane. But Robert was willing to structure creative financing. The company itself was profitable and had strong cash flow. We could use that cash flow to service the acquisition debt. It was a leveraged buyout, risky and complex, but possible. I spent the next 3 weeks in intense negotiations. More lawyers, more bankers, more sleepless nights running numbers and scenarios. But 6 weeks after that Wednesday night, when I overheard Gregory and Kyle discussing my termination, I signed the final documents. Subject to a 2-week closing period, I now owned 100% of Tech Vision Solutions. The closing would finalize this Friday, the same Friday Gregory had scheduled to fire me. The timing was perfect, almost poetic. For 6 weeks, I had carried this secret. I went to work every day knowing I owned 30% already and would soon own it all. I watched Gregory strut around like he controlled everything. I watched Kyle smirk at me in meetings. I wrote training documents for Emily Rodriguez, my supposed replacement, and I smiled. I smiled because they had no idea what was coming. They thought I was defeated, broken, ready to quietly accept my fate. They were so wrong. The night before that final Friday, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from anticipation. I had spent 6 weeks planning this moment. I knew exactly what I would do, what I would say. I rehearsed it in my mind, refining every word. I thought about all the people they had pushed out, all the good employees who had left because the culture had become toxic. I thought about Walter's legacy being corrupted. I thought about my 12 years of dedication being repaid with betrayal. Tomorrow, everything changed. Tomorrow, justice arrived. And Gregory Hartman had no idea he was about to walk into the biggest surprise of his life. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. I woke at 5 a.m., too wired to sleep anymore. I went for a run, showered, made coffee, and dressed carefully. Black suit with a white blouse. Professional, powerful, unshakable. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. 6 weeks ago, I had been defeated, crushed, questioning my worth. Today, I knew exactly who I was and what I was about to do. I arrived at the office at 8 a.m. and went straight to the lawyer's office across town. We finalized the last documents: signatures, notarizations, official transfer of ownership. At 8:15 a.m., I became the sole owner of Tech Vision Solutions. The lawyer congratulated me and handed me a folder containing all the documentation I would need. I drove to the office, parked in my usual spot, and walked through the doors at 8:45. The office hummed with normal Friday energy. People chatted by the coffee machine. Keyboards clicked. Nobody looked at me differently. Why would they? They had no idea. I went to my desk, set down my bag, and opened my email. At 9:15, a message appeared. From Gregory. Subject line: meeting, body text. Please come to my office immediately. I closed my laptop, picked up the folder with my ownership documents, and walked toward the executive suite. People glanced at me as I passed. A few looked concerned. Ashley, a junior associate, whispered good luck as I went by. I smiled at her. Pamela, Gregory's assistant, looked at me with such sympathy when I reached the executive area. She was 52 years old and had been with the company almost as long as me. She knew what was about to happen, or thought she did. He is waiting for you, she said gently, like she was sending me to an execution. I nodded, knocked once on Gregory's door, and walked in. The office was exactly as I remembered. Corner location, windows overlooking Seattle, massive mahogany desk that probably cost more than my car. Gregory sat behind it, and Kyle stood beside him. Both wore expressions that tried to be serious, but could not quite hide their satisfaction. This was the moment they had been planning for months. Charlotte, have a seat, Gregory said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat down, placed my folder on my lap, and waited. Gregory did not waste time. I will get straight to the point. After 12 years, we have decided to make some changes in the client relations department. He paused, watching for my reaction. I gave him nothing, just maintained eye contact. We are restructuring, and unfortunately your position is being eliminated. Kyle spoke up then, his voice oily with false sympathy. We have someone new joining who will be taking over your accounts. We will need you to train her for the next 3 weeks. Her name is Emily Rodriguez. I stayed silent, letting them continue. Gregory pushed a packet of papers across the desk. After training period, we will provide you with 2 weeks severance. That is more than generous for a position elimination. I know this is difficult, but it is a business decision. Nothing personal. Kyle added, we will need comprehensive documentation of all client relationships, communication strategies, pending deals. Everything. Gregory leaned forward, his expression hardening slightly. Charlotte, I hope you will handle this professionally. These clients are crucial to company success. Any disruption and transition would be unfortunate for everyone. It was a threat thinly veiled. Play nice or we will ruin your reputation. I picked up the packet and flipped through it. Standard termination agreement, confidentiality clause, non-compete that would prevent me from working in the industry for 2 years. They had thought of everything, or so they believed. Gregory asked any questions. I closed the packet, set it down on his desk, and looked at him. Actually, I do have a question. Yes. This separation agreement, it references my employment contract dated 12 years ago, correct? Gregory looked confused. Yes, that is standard. And that contract stipulates I serve at the pleasure of the company owner, right? Kyle frowned. Charlotte, what does this have to do with anything? I opened my folder and pulled out the document I had been carrying. Everything. I slid it across the desk to Gregory. That is the stock purchase agreement showing I now own 100% controlling interest in Tech Vision Solutions. As of 8:15 this morning, I am the sole owner of this company. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Gregory stared at the document. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally a draining of all color. He read the first page, then the second, his hands starting to shake. Kyle leaned over his shoulder, read, and physically stumbled backward. This cannot be real, Gregory stammered. It is very real. Notarized this morning. Walter Morrison sold me his 30% stake 6 weeks ago. Grandview Capital sold me their 70% 3 days ago. The transfer finalized at 8:15 a.m. today. But how did the financing alone? I found a way. Turns out banks are very willing to loan money when you can demonstrate intimate knowledge of every revenue stream, every client relationship, every operational detail of a profitable company. Kyle found his voice. You cannot do this. Actually, I can. I just did. Gregory tried to regain composure, his mind clearly racing. Charlotte, let us talk about this. Clearly, there has been some miscommunication. Your role here is valuable. We were simply restructuring. I held up my hand. Stop. I heard you, Gregory. 3 months ago. Wednesday night, conference room. You and Kyle discussed replacing me with Emily Rodriguez to save $120,000. You laughed about how I would never see it coming. You said people get too comfortable. Gregory's face went from pale to deep red. I continued. You had me write training documentation process guides, not for development purposes, but so my replacement could slide in seamlessly. You systematically stripped my responsibilities, took credit for my work, isolated me, all while planning to fire me after extracting every last bit of value. I stood up. So here is what is going to happen now. Gregory, you are terminated, effective immediately. Kyle, you are also terminated, effective immediately. Gregory half stood. You cannot. I absolutely can. As owner, I have full authority. Security will escort you both out within the hour. You will receive 2 weeks severance, the same generous package you offered me. I paused. Actually, no. You will receive 1 week. That feels more appropriate given how you treated people who built this company. Kyle's face twisted. This is illegal. We have contracts. Your contracts have at-will employment clauses. I had my attorneys review them yesterday. Everything is completely legal. I walked to the door and opened it. Pamela, please call security and HR. We have 2 terminations to process. Gregory tried one more time, desperation creeping into his voice. Charlotte, be reasonable. I can help you run this company. You do not have executive experience. I turned back. I have 12 years of experience building this company's most valuable asset, client relationships. I know every operation. I have trained most of the staff. And unlike you, I actually care about the people who work here. Two security officers appeared. Please escort Mr. Hartman and Mr. Bennett to their offices to collect personal items, then out of the building. Their access badges are revoked as of now. Gregory looked like he wanted to say more, but what could he say? He had been outmaneuvered completely. As they walked out, Gregory shot me one last look. You will regret this, Charlotte. This company will fall apart without proper leadership. We will see. I think we will do just fine. I watched them leave, flanked by security. Pamela stood there, mouth open, clearly in shock. I smiled at her gently. Pamela, could you please schedule an all-hands meeting for this afternoon at 2 p.m.? I need to introduce myself properly to everyone. She nodded, still speechless, and I walked back into the office, closing the door behind me. I stood there for a moment, alone in that massive corner office, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for months. It was done. After 12 years of building 2 years of suffering and 6 weeks of secret maneuvering, I had taken back what was mine. 2 p.m. came quickly. I spent the intervening hours in meetings with HR and legal, making sure all termination paperwork was proper and documenting everything for our records. Word had spread through the office like wildfire. Gregory and Kyle fired. Charlotte did it. Nobody knew the full story yet, and the speculation was wild. Finally, it was time to address everyone. I walked into the main conference room where all 120 employees had gathered. The room fell silent. Every face looked at me with a mixture of confusion, curiosity, worry, and in some cases, hope. Good afternoon, everyone. I know there are a lot of questions about what happened this morning. Let me explain. I took a deep breath and told them the truth. All of it. How I had been systematically sidelined and devalued, how I overheard plans to replace me, how I made the decision to buy the company rather than let it continue down a path that betrayed everything it was built on. I did not do this for revenge. I did it because I believe in what we built here together, and I could not watch it be destroyed by people who only saw numbers, not people. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Marcus, a senior developer who had been there for 8 years, stood up. About time someone stood up to them. Applause started scattered, at first then building. People were clapping, some were crying, a few were laughing in disbelief. I felt my own eyes sting but kept my composure. Thank you. But I need you all to know things are going to change. We are going back to what made this company great. Treating people with respect, recognizing hard work, and putting client relationships first. I outlined immediate changes. The promotion freeze Gregory had implemented was lifted. Performance reviews would be redone fairly. The bonus structure would revert to Walter's more equitable model. Open door policy, anyone could talk to me anytime. Tasha, a young designer, raised her hand nervously. What about Emily Rodriguez? Is she still coming? I contacted Emily this morning. I explained the situation honestly. I offered her a different position, one that is actually appropriate for her experience level. She accepted. Emily was not the villain here. She was a young professional who had been offered a job. I was not going to punish her for Gregory's schemes. Gerald from accounting asked what about all of Kyle's initiatives. The new efficiency measures, most of them will be reviewed. If they are genuinely helpful, we keep them. If they were just about cutting costs at the expense of quality or morale, they go. Questions continued for over an hour. I answered every single one honestly and transparently. I promised nothing I could not deliver, but I painted a vision of the company we could be again. When the meeting ended, the energy in that room was something I had not felt in years. People were smiling, talking excitedly, and for the first time in a long time they looked hopeful. The following weeks were a whirlwind. My first priority was client relationships. I personally called each major client to explain the leadership change and reassure them about continuity. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many had noticed the decline in service quality under Gregory's leadership. Mrs. Patricia Holden laughed when I told her the news. "Oh, Charlotte, I am so glad you are in charge now. That Gregory fellow never seemed to understand people-only margins. You are going to make that company shine again." I promoted from within. Tasha became creative director. She had been overlooked despite brilliant work, and she deserved the recognition. Marcus became VP of technology. He had been doing that job without the title or pay for years. Diana, an account manager who had been with us for 6 years, became director of client relations. She was a single mother who had struggled under Kyle's impossible demands. Now she flourished. I created a mentorship program pairing senior employees with newer ones. I brought back weekly team lunches on the company. I reinstated birthday celebrations and work anniversary recognition. I implemented flexible work arrangements for parents and anyone who needed them. Financially, things were tight. The debt from the acquisition was substantial. I took a modest salary for myself, far less than Gregory had paid himself, because every dollar needed to go toward running the company and servicing the loans. But I made sure everyone else was paid fairly. I implemented profit sharing so that when the company did well, everyone benefited, not just executives. The culture shifted dramatically over those first few months. People smiled more. Collaboration increased. Innovation returned because people felt safe to share ideas again without worrying about someone stealing credit. Client retention, which had dropped to 81% under Gregory, climbed back to 95% within 6 months. New business came in through referrals because clients actually enjoyed working with us again. One afternoon, about 4 months after the takeover, I reached out to Linda. We met for coffee at that same shop where she had warned me to leave. She walked in, saw me, and immediately started laughing and crying at the same time. "I knew you had it in you. I just did not think you would buy the entire company." "Come back," I said. "I need someone I trust in senior leadership." "What position?" "Chief Operating Officer. Help me run this the right way." Linda accepted on the spot. Together we implemented systems that supported rather than suppressed employees. We rebuilt what Gregory had torn down. I also started taking care of myself in ways I had not done in years. The stress that had been crushing me for so long began to lift. I took a long weekend at the coast, my first real vacation in 3 years. I reconnected with friends I had neglected. I started going to yoga classes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings before work. The debt remained challenging, but revenue was growing. I lived modestly, keeping my same small condo and my 5-year-old Honda Accord. Every extra dollar went to paying down the acquisition loans, but I was not miserable. I was building something real again. 6 months after taking over, Walter visited the office. It was his first time back since retirement. He walked through, slowly stopping to talk to people, and I watched his eyes fill with tears. "It feels like home again, Charlotte. Thank you for bringing it back. Thank you for believing in me, Walter. Without you, none of this would have been possible." That same week, I received an email from a Seattle business publication. Tech Vision Solutions had been named one of the best places to work in Seattle tech. I printed out the article and hung it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that leadership matters, that culture matters, that treating people with dignity and respect is not just morally right, but good business. This was what I had fought for. This was why the risk had been worth it. 1 year after taking ownership, I sat in my office early one morning with coffee in hand. The building was quiet sunrise, painting the Seattle skyline in shades of gold and pink. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain of those years under Gregory's leadership, the humiliation of being systematically devalued, the shock of discovering their plan to fire me, The crazy, terrifying decision to buy the company, the mountains of debt, the risk of losing everything, the determination that had carried me through. The company was thriving now. Revenue was up 22% from the previous year. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest they had ever been. We had landed 3 major new clients in the past quarter. We had 0 turnover in senior positions. People wanted to work here again. The culture of fear and competition that Gregory had fostered was gone, replaced by collaboration and mutual support. Financially, I was still managing significant debt, but it was on track. The loan payments were manageable due to the company's strong performance. I had learned to balance work and life in ways I never had before. I was even dating someone, a teacher named Andrew, who had never worked in tech and brought a completely different perspective to my life. It was nice to have something outside of work that mattered. I thought about Gregory and Kyle sometimes. Through industry connections, I had heard that Gregory had landed at another company in a smaller role. Kyle was apparently struggling to find a position at his previous level. I felt no satisfaction in their struggles. I had moved past anger and bitterness. They had taught me an expensive lesson about trust and loyalty, but I was not going to waste energy hating them. I had better things to do with my life. My email pinged. A new message appeared in my inbox. The sender name made me pause. Gregory Hartman. I hesitated, my cursor hovering over it. Part of me wanted to delete it without reading, but curiosity won. I opened it. The subject line was acknowledgement. The message was short. Charlotte. I have had a year to think about what happened. I was wrong. Not just wrong in how I treated you, but wrong in how I understood what makes a company valuable. You taught me an expensive lesson. I hope Tech Vision continues to thrive under your leadership. You earned it. Gregory. I read it twice. It was not quite an apology, but it was something. An admission. An acknowledgement of failure. I sat there for several minutes, deciding whether to respond. Finally, I typed out a brief reply. Gregory, thank you for reaching out. I hope you have found a place where your talents are better matched. I wish you well. Charlotte. I hit send. It felt like closing a chapter. Not with anger or triumph, but with simple completion. That part of my life was over. What mattered now was moving forward. Later that morning, a young employee named Jasmine knocked on my door. She was 24 years old, had started as an account coordinator about 8 months ago, and looked nervous. Do you have a minute? Of course, come in. She sat down, fidgeting with her hands. I am feeling overlooked in meetings. My ideas get dismissed. I am worried I am not valued here. I heard my own story in her words and felt a surge of protective instinct. Let me tell you something I learned. Your value is not determined by whether others see it. It is inherent. But sometimes you have to advocate for yourself in ways that feel uncomfortable. I shared pieces of my story, not all the details, but enough. I explained how I had stayed quiet too long, hoping my work would speak for itself. How I learned that sometimes you have to speak up, document your contributions, build relationships, and know when a situation is toxic versus when it just needs time. But what if I am not brave enough? She asked. I was not brave either. I was desperate. Bravery came later when I had to follow through. Start small, document your work, speak up in meetings, build relationships with colleagues, and if nothing changes, know when to walk away. Never stay somewhere that diminishes you. Jasmine left looking more confident. After she walked out, I realized something. This was exactly why I had fought so hard for this company. Not for revenge or pride, but to create a place where people like Jasmine could grow without being crushed, where talent was recognized rather than exploited, where you did not have to buy the entire company to be treated with basic respect. That was the legacy I wanted to build. Not just a profitable business, but a place that reflected the values Walter had instilled from the beginning. I stood at the window looking out at the city. Seattle had been my home for my entire adult life. This company had been my professional home for 12 years, longer than some marriages last. I thought about the lessons those 12 years had taught me. Your loyalty to a company should match their loyalty to you. Being underestimated can be an advantage if you use it wisely. The best revenge is not revenge at all, it is building something better. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is bet on yourself, but also you never do anything alone. Walter had believed in me. Nathan had taken a chance on me. Linda had come back. Employees had stayed and fought to make the new culture work. Success was never individual. It was always collective. That afternoon, we had our weekly leadership meeting. Diana poked her head in my office. Morning meeting in 10 minutes. Ready? Ready. I grabbed my coffee and portfolio and headed to the conference room. On the way, I passed a plaque we had installed in the hallway last month. Tech Vision Solutions. Founded 2008. Leadership Matters. Simple words that carried everything I believed. Gregory and Kyle had tried to make me train my replacement. Instead, I had replaced them. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, tried to erase me. But I had learned something they never understood. Power is not just about position or title. It is about knowledge, relationships, courage, and the willingness to act when the moment demands it. And I had learned the most important lesson of all. Never let anyone convince you that your value is less than what you know it to be. Not a boss who steals your work, not a system that overlooks you, not voices in your own head that whisper you are not enough. Because one day when you stop accepting their version of your worth and start acting on your own, you might just prove them wrong in ways they never saw coming. And when that day comes, when you stand in the office that was supposed to belong to someone else in the company they tried to take from you, you will understand that the greatest power you ever had was believing you deserved better and having the courage to fight for it. So if you have ever felt invisible at work, taken for granted, or pushed aside after giving everything you had, I want you to know something. Your worth is not determined by people who refuse to see it. You are not defined by those who undervalue you. And sometimes the best response to being underestimated is not anger or bitterness, but action. Quiet, determined, strategic action that changes everything. That is what I did. That is what saved not just my career, but my sense of self. And if I can do it starting from a place of complete defeat, then maybe you can too. The question is not whether you are capable. The question is whether you are ready to believe in yourself as much as you have believed in everyone else. Have you ever been underestimated or pushed aside at work? Have you ever had to fight for recognition you clearly deserved? Drop a comment and share your story. I would love to hear how you handled it. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or reminded you of your own worth, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is struggling at work, feeling invisible, wondering if things will ever change. Let them know they are not alone, and that sometimes the best victories are the ones nobody sees coming. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. I hope you walk away from this remembering that you are valuable, you are capable, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Never forget that, and never stop fighting for the life and career you deserve. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.